Long before the great houses of Westeros rose and fell, the western hills carried stories that shaped the fate of the realm. Tonight, we turn our attention to one of the most powerful and enduring legacies in all the Seven Kingdoms. A house built on gold, myth, ambition, and the unyielding stone of Casterly Rock. This is the history of House Lannister, from whispered legends in the Age of Heroes to the rise of kings, queens, and those whose influence changed the realm forever. Settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin our journey into one of the greatest dynasties ever written. The origins of House Lannister extend into the early shaping of the Westerlands, when the first men settlements gathered around the rocky foothills that skirted the western coast, forming small hill forts near seams of tin and copper that lay close enough to the surface for simple tools to uncover. These communities relied on narrow valleys for grazing and on the mineral veins for early metalwork, creating a modest network of stone roundhouses and timber palisades that anchored the first organized societies in the region. Traces of these early groups remained in the low ridges around the future site of Casterly Rock, where pottery shards and forgotten foundations marked an age before written record. Yet already the land's wealth was influencing the growth of local chieftains who traded raw ore for grain and hardy livestock from the riverlands. These settlements gradually bound themselves to a lineage that traced descent from the legendary figure of Lann the Clever, a character whose presence in both stories and regional identity shaped the emerging culture of the Westerlands long before a centralized ruling house appeared. The tales surrounding Lann presented him as a trickster who relied on wit rather than force, weaving deceptions and subtle maneuvering to seize control of Casterly Rock from its ancient inhabitants. Though the stories differed between singers, the consistent theme placed him as an outsider who arrived with a sharp mind and an aptitude for exploiting divisions among those who lived within the rock's cavernous depths. In some versions, he manipulated the Casterlys through forged omens. In others, he persuaded them to open their gates to him with cleverly engineered illusions, while certain accounts described him infiltrating the fortress to undermine their trust from within. Whatever the accuracy of each detail, later chroniclers in the Westerlands considered the result incontestable. Lann secured ownership of the rock and passed it to descendants who formed the early framework of what would become one of the wealthiest houses in Westeros. The gradual replacement of the Casterly line within administrative records suggested that Lann's rise coincided with an era of increased mineral extraction, when mixed copper and gold veins in the western hills drew itinerant miners and caravans that offered new opportunities for consolidation of influence. The transformation from a loose family association into a recognized ruling dynasty occurred slowly, marked by generations of leaders who expanded control over the region's ore resources. The deep caverns of Casterly Rock allowed for extraction on a scale far greater than any surface operation, and shafts dug through ancient stone revealed new pockets of high-yield gold that spread the family's wealth far beyond the boundaries of the Westerlands. Communities that once pledged fealty to various petty kings found it increasingly practical to align themselves with the Lannister rulers, who offered stable trade, protection for caravans, and the opportunity to benefit from the expanding mining industry. The gradual establishment of taxation systems tied to mineral output supported the growth of organized settlements along the foothills, including early market towns that handled the sorting, weighting, and storage of gold for shipment to ports. With every generation, the family's influence solidified, until its name appeared in chronicles as the premier authority in the region, an authority often strengthened by marriage alliances that unified formerly independent hill clans and fortified the position of Casterly Rock as a centre of governance. The arrival of the Andals in Westeros created a long period of gradual cultural blending in the Westerlands, where the terrain allowed local defenders to hold fortified positions, while the newcomers introduced iron weapons and new systems of knighthood. The Lannisters adapted by integrating Andal customs while maintaining ancestral ties to the First Men, forming a hybrid tradition that distinguished the region from both the Riverlands to the east and the Stormlands farther south. Marriage to Andal families accelerated the adoption of new naming practices, heraldry, and the codification of feudal obligations, ensuring the house retained its leadership while avoiding destructive conflicts that burdened other regions during the migrations. This balance allowed the Westerlands to develop a stable feudal hierarchy, with vassal houses such as the Rains, the Tarbecks, the Banefords, and the Greenfields, managing extensive tracts of productive land. The political landscape that emerged relied heavily on the mining economy, where gold and silver funded the construction of roads that linked hill forts with trade centres and ports, enabling swift movement of goods and information. In this environment, the Lannisters strengthened their network of sworn houses who pledged military support and contributed to the defensive readiness of the region. By the time the Age of Heroes faded into the more formally chronicled periods, the Lannisters were recognized throughout Westeros for their immense wealth. The family's sigil of a golden lion on crimson came to symbolize not merely territorial power, but also access to resources that no other region could rival. Casterly Rock itself grew into a marvel of carved halls, descending stairwells, and expansive chambers hollowed from solid stone, with storerooms designed to hold bullion and grain reserves capable of sustaining its inhabitants through lengthy sieges. Chroniclers noted that the wealth derived from the rock allowed the house to outfit its levies with high-quality armor and maintain a standing force that could be mobilized with surprising speed. The combination of mineral wealth and strategic fortification produced a culture that valued discipline, record-keeping, and social hierarchy, while also supporting the development of craftspeople who specialized in metalwork, fine textiles dyed in rich colors, and stonecutters skilled in working the pale granite of the western coast. These cultural traits persisted across generations, shaping the distinct identity that set the Westerlands apart from neighboring territories. During the era when Andal principalities coalesced into more structured realms, the Lannisters consolidated power through a blend of calculated diplomacy and regional stability. Ports along the coastline exported gold in exchange for grain, timber, and luxury goods, creating a flow of resources that enriched not only Casterly Rock, but also the surrounding towns. This commerce required secure routes, and so the family invested in patrol forces and small garrisons positioned along key passes. These defensive installations were staffed by retainers trained in both arms and basic administration, responsible for maintaining order and protecting caravans from banditry. The network of smaller keeps allowed the family to monitor production throughout the Westerlands, establish communication between vassals, and project authority into valleys otherwise isolated by rugged terrain. This system made the region notably difficult to invade, as any hostile force would face a coordinated response informed by rapid relays of messages through well-maintained roads and watchtowers. As political structures solidified across Westeros, the Lannisters emerged as one of the great houses whose influence extended far beyond their borders. Their wealth allowed them to act as creditors to both allies and distant lords, forging relationships through financial support that could sway political decisions. The western ports became hubs for merchants from the free cities, who exchanged exotic dyes, spices, and manuscripts for refined gold ingots and finished metal goods produced by artisans within the rock. Such economic strength translated into growing cultural influence, visible in the elaborate feasts, ornate tapestries, and finely wrought ornaments that became associated with the courts of Western nobility. Over time, these displays of wealth reinforced the perception of the Lannisters as a family whose fortunes seemed inexhaustible, a reputation that peers and rivals acknowledged even when tensions arose over territorial claims or succession rights. The era preceding the Targaryen conquest witnessed several notable Lannister rulers, among them Loreon the First Lannister and his successors, who expanded the family's authority and established precedents for governance that would influence later generations. Loreon's reign was marked by efforts to standardize tax collection from mining operations, ensuring that all significant excavations contributed a portion of their output to the rock. This system allowed for improved record keeping and enabled the family to maintain reserves of bullion that could be called upon for public works or military expenditures. Subsequent rulers focused on strengthening ties with vassal houses by granting charters that formalized land rights and outlined responsibilities for maintaining roads, bridges, and defensive structures. These agreements helped stabilize relations among the lesser houses and reduce the likelihood of internal disputes that might weaken the region's cohesion. Through such measures, the Westerlands entered the Targaryen era with a firmly entrenched political structure centered on the enduring authority of House Lannister. When Aegon the Conqueror launched his campaign to unify Westeros under Targaryen rule, the Westerlands were led by King Loren Lannister, whose reign coincided with the alliance formed between the Westerlands and the Reach under King Mern the Ninth Gardener. The two rulers assembled a formidable force to confront Aegon's armies, recognizing that the combined strength of their knights and infantry offered the best opportunity to repel the invaders. Historical accounts noted the scale of the assembled force, which drew on the resources of the region's mineral wealth to equip thousands of heavily armored soldiers. Yet the battle that followed at the Field of Fire demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of Aegon's dragons, whose intervention shattered the Alliance's forces despite their numerical advantage. In the aftermath, Loren bent the knee to Aegon, preserving his family's authority as lords of the Westerlands, while relinquishing the independent kingship that the Lannisters had held for centuries. The transition to vassalage under the Iron Throne required careful adjustment, yet the house maintained its regional autonomy, and Casterly Rock retained its status as the administrative center of the Western Realm. Under Targaryen rule, the Lannisters adjusted to a political environment in which decisions of wider consequence flowed through King's Landing, requiring the Western lords to navigate relationships with royal officials while preserving local authority. The mining economy continued to provide the foundation for regional stability, allowing the family to fund improvements to roads that connected inland settlements with Lannisport, a port city that expanded rapidly in the early years of the new dynasty. Investment in wharves, warehouses, and merchant guild halls supported the growth of trade, as vessels from the free cities arrived to conduct business under the protection of agreements negotiated by Lannister envoys. These arrangements ensured favorable tariffs and regular exchange of goods, strengthening ties between the Westerlands and associate mercantile interests. Meanwhile, the the Rock's administrators maintained strict oversight of mineral production, keeping detailed accounts of shipments bound for the capital and ensuring that taxes owed to the Iron Throne were delivered promptly. This administrative discipline earned the family a reputation for reliability, which benefited their standing among other great houses. The relationship between House Lannister and the Targaryen dynasty developed along practical lines. Though not frequently entwined through marriage, the Lannisters maintained a measured distance from royal politics while contributing essential economic support to the realm. Some rulers of the West sought to cultivate influence in the capital by placing trusted advisors within the Red Keep, individuals responsible for monitoring trade agreements and securing exemptions that favored Western merchants. Others focused on internal stability, overseeing the distribution of mining rights and intervening in disputes among vassals when necessary. This balance produced a period of relative peace, during which artisan guilds in Lannisport flourished. Metalworkers refined techniques for producing intricate jewelry and ceremonial armor, while shipbuilders improved design methods for long-distance trade vessels. The prosperity of the port city reinforced the importance of the Lannisters within the realm, even when they were not directly involved in major events that shaped the Seven Kingdoms. Throughout these centuries, Casterly Rock continued to expand internally, with new chambers carved to house archives, armories, and quarters for the growing household staff, who managed the daily operations of the fortress. Skilled stonecutters and engineers worked in carefully planned stages, ensuring that structural integrity remained intact while creating additional space for storage and administration. Some excavations revealed ancient tunnels and minor veins of gold, providing unexpected returns on projects initially designed for architectural purposes. The increased complexity of the rock's interior required a more elaborate bureaucratic structure, leading to the creation of offices dedicated to overseeing supplies, maintaining records of mining yields, and managing correspondence with vassal houses. These functions supported a level of organization that distinguished House Lannister from many of its peers, reinforcing its long reputation for order and financial competence. During the height of Targaryen rule, the political landscape of the Westerlands remained shaped by the relationships among its leading houses. Families such as the Reynes and the Tarbecks held extensive territories and commanded significant resources, occasionally prompting tensions with Casterly Rock when disputes arose over taxation, rights of passage, or the management of shared borders. These issues required careful diplomacy, and members of the Lannister household often traveled to local courts to mediate disagreements or inspect properties subject to royal taxation. The need to maintain stability in a region defined by wealth and competing interests placed considerable demands on the ruling lord, who relied on trusted bannermen and administrators to provide accurate assessments of regional affairs. Such systems ensured that even during periods of external turmoil, such as succession crises in King's Landing, the Westerlands remained largely insulated from broader upheavals. The political equilibrium of the region shifted during the reign of Titus Lannister, a lord whose gentle disposition and reluctance to enforce authority allowed ambitious vassal houses to test the limits of their obligations. Titus maintained a generous and forgiving approach to governance, extending loans to vassals and merchants with lenient terms that encouraged dependence rather than discipline. His willingness to overlook minor transgressions and waive penalties emboldened certain houses, particularly the Reynes of Castamere and the Tarbecks of Tarbeck Hall, who took advantage of his leniency by neglecting debts and resisting oversight from the Rock. While other vassals remained loyal, The lack of firm leadership resulted in gradual erosion of centralized authority, exposing the region to the risk of internal conflict. Administrators within Casterly Rock struggled to uphold the established systems of record-keeping and taxation, as some vassals delayed or avoided fulfilling obligations that previous generations had maintained without dispute. The rise of the Rains and Tarbecks as regional challengers reflected deepening structural issues in the governance of the Westerlands. Both houses controlled valuable lands and accumulated wealth sufficient to outfit their own forces, enabling them to assert a level of independence not seen in earlier centuries. Castamere, with its subterranean halls, mirrored some aspects of Casterly Rock's defensive capabilities on a smaller scale, allowing the Rains to fortify their holdings against any attempt at intervention. The Tarbecks, meanwhile, expanded their influence through alliances with lesser houses who felt marginalized during Titus's rule. These developments created a complex network of loyalties that diverged from traditional feudal hierarchies, prompting concern among more conservative vassals who feared the destabilizing effects of increased autonomy among powerful houses. The shifting balance of power emphasized the importance of strong leadership at Casterly Rock, which at the time was delayed by Titus's reluctance to challenge those who defied him. As tensions escalated, Gerald and Ellen Rain emerged as prominent figures in the growing conflict. Their relationship with Titus deteriorated when demands for repayment of debts and compliance with obligations were ignored or met with open defiance. Their actions extended beyond simple refusal, as they fostered alliances aimed at undermining Lannister authority across the region. Ellen Tarbeck, in particular, played a significant role in maneuvering political relationships that strengthened their position. Her understanding of regional grievances allowed her to cultivate support among smaller houses, creating a coalition capable of resisting intervention from the Rock. The unfolding situation placed increasing pressure on Titus, whose inability to impose consequences allowed the conflict to spread into broader dissatisfaction with the central administration of the Westerlands. The tension created uncertainty among merchants, miners, and local officials, all of whom depended on the stability traditionally associated with Lannister rule. In this climate, Tywin Lannister assumed increasing responsibilities, acting with decisiveness that contrasted sharply with his father's gentler nature. Tywin, observing the erosion of authority and the disorder arising from unchecked defiance, began consolidating support among loyal houses and reorganizing administrative structures to restore discipline. His approach emphasized strict enforcement of obligations, consistent taxation, and clear expectations for vassal behavior. Tywin's early actions as heir helped stabilize relations with those vassals who favored strong leadership and who viewed the rising influence of the Rains and Tarbecks as a threat to regional order. His reputation for efficiency and resolve grew as he negotiated with merchants, strengthened ties with prominent families, and oversaw the reorganization of supply chains essential for mining operations. The contrast between father and son became a defining aspect of the political climate, shaping expectations for the future of Lannister governance. Tywin's emergence as the effective leader of the Westerlands set the stage for direct confrontation with the houses that had defied Lannister authority during Titus's later years. The Rains and Tarbecks interpreted Tywin's initial reforms as a threat to their autonomy, responding with further refusals to acknowledge debts and by bolstering their own defenses. Records from this period noted increased activity at Castamere and Tarbeck Hall, where work crews expanded fortifications, stockpiled provisions, and gathered retainers in anticipation of conflict. These preparations indicated that both houses expected decisive action from Casterly Rock and intended to withstand any attempts to enforce long-standing obligations. As the tension deepened, Tywin pursued diplomatic avenues long enough to demonstrate adherence to feudal custom, issuing formal demands for compliance and offering opportunities for negotiation. When these overtures were rejected or ignored, the path toward armed intervention became clear, and preparations began within the Rock to restore order through force. The conflict that followed became known for its efficiency and for the lasting impact it had on the political structure of the Westerlands. Tywin assembled forces drawn from loyal vassals and supplemented them with retainers whose training and equipment reflected the wealth of the region. The campaign began with a swift march into territories controlled by the Tarbecks, whose forces attempted to resist the advance, but found themselves outmatched by the discipline and resources of the Lannister host. Tarbeck Hall, though fortified, lacked the subterranean complexity of Castamere and fell after a brief confrontation. Members of House Tarbeck were taken or killed during the assault, and the destruction of their seat marked the beginning of a decisive shift in the balance of power. With the Tarbeck subdued, Tywin turned his attention to Castamere, where the Rains had withdrawn to prepare for a prolonged defense. Castamere's defenses posed a unique challenge. The halls beneath the surface offered shelter that could not be breached easily through conventional siege tactics, and the natural layout of the complex allowed the defenders to retreat deeper into the tunnels if initial barriers failed. Tywin, aware of the limitations of a surface siege against such terrain, employed a method that leveraged the geology of the site. By diverting water into the underground tunnels and chambers, he ensured that the defenders would be overwhelmed gradually, leaving no possibility for escape or continued defiance. The result was complete elimination of the Rain family and the destruction of their seat, an outcome that sent a clear message to all vassals concerning the expectations attached to Lannister authority. The incident reshaped political dynamics throughout the Westerlands, reinforcing centralized governance and eliminating any remaining doubts about Tywin's capacity for decisive action. In the aftermath of the conflict, Tywin oversaw the restoration of order by reasserting traditional systems of taxation and feudal obligations. Lands formerly held by the rebellious houses were placed under the control of families who had demonstrated loyalty during the crisis, and administrative reform strengthened oversight throughout the region. Tywin's reputation extended beyond the Westerlands, earning recognition in King's Landing for his ability to maintain stability in a territory defined by wealth and strategic importance. His leadership style, characterized by discipline and rigor, influenced his later appointment as Hand of the King, where his administrative skills shaped royal governance during the reigns of Aerys II and, in time, his own grandchildren. The Westerlands benefited from the renewed stability as mining operations resumed their regular output and trade routes remained secure under enhanced oversight. The kingdom under Aerys II presented a complex political environment for House Lannister. Tywin's tenure as Hand of the King introduced efficiencies in taxation, legal administration, and management of crown finances that earned considerable respect from nobles and small folk alike. His methods ensured steady revenue for the throne, drawing on both Crown lands resources and contributions from the great houses. Relations between Tywin and Aerys, however, shifted as the king's behavior became increasingly erratic. Initial cooperation gave way to mistrust as Aerys grew suspicious of Tywin's influence and of the respect he commanded throughout the realm. Events such as Tywin's refusal to agree to a proposed marriage between Rhaegar Targaryen and Cersei Lannister deepened the divide, creating a strained atmosphere within the court. While tensions unfolded in King's Landing, the Westerlands remained largely stable under the stewardship of Tywin's appointed administrators. Mining output continued to support regional prosperity, and Lannisport maintained its place as a significant trade hub. The city's guilds expanded into new forms of craftsmanship, producing goods sought in both the capital and the free cities. Casterly Rock's bureaucratic offices kept detailed records of exports, ensuring consistent revenue even during periods of political uncertainty. Despite national instability, daily life in the Westerlands proceeded with the continuity that came from centuries of organized governance. This stability would prove essential during the uprising that ultimately overthrew the Targaryen dynasty, as the region's resources positioned House Lannister to respond swiftly to shifting political circumstances. The outbreak of Robert's rebellion placed House Lannister in a delicate position. Tywin maintained neutrality for most of the conflict, observing developments carefully while assessing the balance of power. His decision not to commit forces early reflected an understanding of the risks associated with choosing prematurely between crown and rebel factions. During this period, the Westerlands remained on alert, but suffered minimal disruption, with local lords maintaining defenses and continuing regular oversight of their lands. The turning point came after the Battle of the Trident, when Robert Baratheon's victory demonstrated the likely outcome of the war. Tywin acted decisively, marching on King's Landing under the guise of support for Aerys II. Gaining entry to the city, his forces secured strategic locations and contributed to the downfall of the Targaryen regime. This action positioned House Lannister as a dominant influence in the new political order, with consequences that shaped the early years of Robert's reign. Following the war, House Lannister's integration into the new administration formed through a combination of financial and political leverage. The marriage of Cersei Lannister to King Robert established a direct link between the Rock and the throne, while Tywin's reputation ensured continued respect within the capital. Jaime Lannister's placement in the Kingsguard created additional ties to royal power, though his role generated complex reactions due to the circumstances surrounding the death of Aerys II. The Westerlands experienced continued prosperity as mining operations supplied gold essential for stabilizing crown finances. Trade through Lannisport expanded in response to growing demand for Western goods, and new caravan routes were established to support increased movement of materials toward King's Landing. The administrative systems refined under Tywin ensured efficiency even during periods of broader turbulence. During the years preceding the events widely chronicled in later narratives, political life within the Westerlands revolved around effective management of resources and steady communication with the capital. Local lords oversaw agriculture, mining, and internal trade networks that supplied both regional markets and the royal treasury. The Rock's records from this period reflected consistent production levels from major mining centers, particularly those near the foothills north and east of the fortress. These mines operated under strict oversight to prevent theft, ensure safety, and maintain the stability of the tunnels over long periods of extraction. Skilled miners and engineers worked collaboratively to locate new veins and reinforce aging shafts. Their efforts kept the flow of gold steady and supported the reputation of the Westerlands as a source of wealth unmatched by any other region. As Robert's reign progressed, the Lannisters' influence in King's Landing grew through a combination of financial necessity and political maneuvering. The crown accumulated significant debt to House Lannister, drawing heavily on its resources to fund both governance and festivities. These financial obligations strengthened the family's leverage, though they also placed increased strain on administrators in the Rock, who monitored shipments of gold and ensured deliveries reached the capital on schedule. The complexities of royal expenditure encouraged Tywin to maintain a cautious stance in his communication with the throne, balancing obligations with expectations for repayment. The financial structure that developed during this period served as the foundation for later political tensions that unfolded as the stability of the realm began to weaken. Within the Westerlands, the internal affairs of the Great House shaped a network of responsibilities that extended across its many vassals. Lords managing the hill country oversaw shipments of ore that flowed downriver toward Lannisport, while coastal houses coordinated with merchants who supplied imported goods necessary for mining operations, including tools, timber, and specialized equipment sourced from the free cities. Inland settlements focused on sustaining the workforce, maintaining grain stores, and supervising the small forges that repaired tools essential for daily labor. These communities operated within a hierarchy that traced authority steadily upward toward Casterly Rock, where officials maintained ledgers tracking yields, expenses, and obligations linked to both the crown and local governance. The continued efficiency of this administrative system ensured that even as political pressures mounted in the capital, the Westerlands preserved their long-standing reputation for reliability. The gradual decline of Robert Baratheon's governance increased dependence on the Lannisters, whose financial support remained indispensable to the operation of the crown. As the king travelled less frequently, and decisions increasingly rested with advisors, Cersei Lannister's presence at court positioned the family to influence proceedings indirectly. Her decisions reflected priorities shaped by both personal alliances and the needs of her house, encouraging closer ties between Western interests and those factions within the capital who benefited from stability in the realm's economic affairs. Jaime Lannister's role, though bound by the constraints of the Kingsguard, added further complexity to the family's presence in the capital. His position placed him near the centers of power, allowing for observation of developments that could affect the security of both the Iron Throne and Casterly Rock. The death of Jon Arryn marked a significant shift in political dynamics across the Seven Kingdoms, creating a vacancy in the handship that carried implications for the balance of power. As investigations into Arryn's activities raised questions concerning succession, legitimacy, and the future of the realm, tensions between houses deepened. Within this changing landscape, House Lannister faced both opportunities and risks. The family's substantial financial leverage remained an asset, yet the growing instability in King's Landing placed increased pressure on Tywin to consider how best to secure the future of his house amid emerging uncertainties. The Westerlands, meanwhile, continued their dependable operations, with mining output maintaining levels consistent with earlier decades. Local lords, aware of the shifting political climate, reinforced watchposts and increased patrols along key routes to ensure continued security for trade and transport. After Robert's death, governance in the capital shifted into a state of divided authority as the council struggled to maintain continuity, while competing interpretations of succession gained force. The claim advanced on behalf of Joffrey drew immediate support from those whose positions depended on stability within King's Landing, and Lannister resources were directed towards strengthening garrisons, provisioning the city, and reinforcing the administrative offices responsible for taxation and supply. Within the Westerlands, levies were assembled with notable efficiency, drawing on systems refined across generations of regional conflict management. Commanders familiar with both the terrain and the logistical networks of the West coordinated the movement of men and material toward the capital, ensuring that supply chains could sustain extended mobilization. As the Lannisters solidified their position of power, disgruntled houses across the realm made their claim for the ultimate prize, the Iron Throne. And with this, the Battle of Five Kings was underway. But alas, that, my dear listener, is a story for another day.